And now we're here to hear the second speaker. The second speaker is one of our own Toastmaster members. Wesley Sherwood is one of our, he works in the solar generation. He's been asked in the past to discuss what does he do for a living? So mysterious. But tonight he will unveil a little bit of that mystery of his. Tonight he will share with us about what role he plays in making electricity from the sun. His speech will be followed by a question and answer session. This is a good opportunity to learn more about the solar generation. Please join me in providing a warm welcome to Mr. Wesley Sherwood. Lights, camera, solar. Wesley Sherwood, lights, camera, solar.
Good evening, Toastmasters. Good evening, guests. My name is Wesley Sherwood, and I work in solar power generation. I've been in that business for about 3 years. Before that, I worked in other power plants, and I've done other speeches about those type of power plants. But tonight, I'll be talking about solar power generation. Now, let me see with a raise of hands, how many of you here are physics majors? How many of you here are chemistry majors? All right, so we've got a few of you out there. So it looks like most of our audience has very limited knowledge on physics and chemistry. That is okay. My goal tonight is to explain to you how solar power generation works without any of the complicated chemical formulas or physics formulas or any complicated mathematics. So no calculus tonight. All right, so in order for you to make electricity from solar, you need to first start off with solar panels. Now, for Tampa Electric, one of the largest power plants that we have is about 75 megawatts. 75 megawatts is 75 million watts. So if you're trying to understand what 75 million watts or 75 megawatts is, it's the equivalent of the amount of power to supply electricity or energy to 11,000 homes. So that's pretty much what you would get from a typical plant. This photo here shows you an actual plant. This is the Little Manatee River solar plant located in Ruskin. If you look to the upper left-hand corner here, you'll see the actual I-75 freeway. So that kind of gives you an idea where it is. It's over 500 acres, actually a little bit closer to 600 acres, but there are certain areas where there's no actual solar panels. I'm going to go a little further into detail, so hang with me here. Hopefully I'm still keeping everyone engaged. In order for you to make power from solar, the three steps are: 1, making the electricity with solar; 2, converting electricity; and 3, exporting that electricity to customers. Tonight, I will share with you all 3 steps. First step, making electricity with solar. As I mentioned before, in order for you to make electricity with solar, you need to have solar panels. Another term for solar panels is photovoltaic modules, or PV modules. And if you look at the previous photo I showed you, there was a sea of PV modules. PV modules are set up in an arrangement where, actually, well, let me correct myself here. In utility grade solar, usually what happens is your panels face the sun in order to generate electricity. In order for you to generate electricity, you do not actually generate it from the heat of the sun, it's actually from the light. So the panels actually follow the sun throughout the day. They start in the east, and as the sun moves across the sky, the solar panels track all the way to the west. In order for you to do that, they are set up with what's called a tracker. And I've generated a small little drawing here that will show you how that works. So if you look here, it starts off with your panels facing east. And bear with my little stick figures here. Underneath the panel on the right-hand side is called an actuator. Basically, it's a piston. And it's a piston that extends or retracts. It starts off with the piston all the way extended, and that tilts the panel to your east. As your sun moves to the middle of the sky, the panel will tilt, the actuator will actually retract, and you'll end up with the panel facing directly above. At the end of the day, the actuator retracts all the way to its lowest point, and the panel faces to the west. And that's how you're able to follow the sun throughout the day. So it's not that it has 3 distinct positions, it actually moves about a degree throughout the day. So it moves just inches along, like every 10 minutes, you'll hear it move for that 1 degree till it gets all the way to its west. In our homes, we have electricity flowing through our wires in the walls. It comes in through the meter, and we use this electricity for many things throughout the day. The electricity that we use is called AC, or alternating current. Unfortunately, with solar, it generates what's called direct current, or DC. If you look at the DC electricity, it's a constant source of electricity. So for example, if you're getting 12 volts from your battery in your car, for example, that's DC. It's always 12 volts. It does not fluctuate. It doesn't change. It's always just giving 12 volts until, of course, the battery starts to drain off and then you don't have any more electricity. With AC, it's a little more complicated because with AC, the electricity actually, first it increases, it goes to a peak, and then it decreases, and then it goes negative. So actually what happens is, with AC electricity, it's actually changing direction. Not only is it moving towards you, so if you have your electricity coming to your home, it actually comes to your home and it actually switches back direction and goes back to the solar site. It happens very, very quickly. It actually happens 60 times per second that it changes that direction, which is very, very rapid. Later on, I will explain to you how it actually converts. And at the end, if anyone has any questions on AC and DC, I can dwell into that a little further. Once your DC electricity is generated by your solar panels, they're fed into an isolation point called a combiner box. A combiner box forms a point where you can actually isolate your DC electricity completely in case you need to do any work on the system. At this point, the combiner box voltage increases a lot more than it is at the panels. At the panels, the voltage is about 70 volts on each panel. At the combiner box, it jumps up to about 1500 volts. Now, as we discussed before, the DC that's coming from the panels need to be converted to AC. And in order for us to do that, we use what's called a power conversion station. There's 2 major components to the power conversion station. One is an inverter, and actually in the case of utility grade solar, we have multiple inverters inside of the power conversion station. And then a transformer. So the inverter actually converts your DC to AC, and your transformer actually steps up the voltage. In order for you to create DC from AC, what actually happens is your DC gets sampled inside of your inverter, and there's what's called a transistor, which in a sense is like a valve inside of your plumbing at your home. So imagine if you have your water turned on, all the way on, and it's just flowing. That's DC electricity. But in order for you to get your, excuse me, in order for you to get AC, what actually happens is you, excuse me, you actually turn off the water and turn the water back on. So each time you turn the water on, you turn it on and you hold it on for a shorter period of time. And if you look at this graph here, it indicates what you have here. Where imagine if you turn the valve on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, and then you feed that signal through what's called a diode. So when it gets fed through the diode actually changes directions. So now you're still flipping your switch on and off, on and off, on and off, and now you generate the negative part of your signal. This actually happens inside of your inverter at a 200 kilohertz frequency, which is 20,000 times per second. So 20 times per second, this switch is going on and off, and it then creates this wave that we have over here, which is flipping directions 60 times per second. Once your AC electricity leaves your inverter, it goes over to what's called a substation. Inside of your substation, your electricity is getting ready to exit your solar power plant. Inside of there, you have what's called a transformer, and you actually have your high tension lines. The transformer steps up the voltage from your power conversion station from 600 volts to 34,500 volts, and then steps it up once more to 69,000 volts, or in some cases 230,000 volts. You increase your voltage because the voltage helps you to transmit that electricity for long distances. Like for example, if your solar plant's in Ruskin and you're in Tampa, it enables the electricity to travel at large distance. Here's a close-up photo of what a transformer looks like. On the left-hand side here is the side coming in from your solar plant, and on the right-hand side is your feeders going out to your grid. The third part of generating solar power is actually exporting the electricity to your customers. The electricity leaves the solar plant and goes onto the power grid. The power grid, as I mentioned before, it goes all over the country. It could be in Ruskin and you could be living in Tampa. We're all on the same grid. And it goes as far as, it could go as far south as Key West, and it could go as far north as Maine. Electricity on the power grid could be as high as 345,000 volts, but commonly in the Tampa electric service area, it's usually 230,000 volts or 69,000 volts. I did a speech recently on electricity, and at 230,000 volts, you actually do not have to touch the wire to be electrocuted. If you go within 10 feet of that wire, you will actually become a part of that circuit and become electrocuted, which is why those high tension lines are kept so high off the ground. They're usually 20 or 30 feet off the ground. In order for that electricity to go into your home, it needs to be passed back through a transformer in the opposite direction. So when it goes from the utility poles into your homes, it goes through what's called a step down transformer. So the voltage steps down to either 480 volts, 4,000 volts, or 220 volts, depending on if you're a house, commercial, or industrial facility. And at that point, your electricity arrives at your home. And at this point, that is the conclusion of my presentation. And at this point, I'm open to answering any questions you may have about solar power generation. I have to change my view here so that I can see if anyone has their hands up. Okay, I'll start in the upper left-hand corner. I have Alyssa. Alyssa, what questions do you have?
Yeah, this was very enlightening information, and thank you for sharing it. I'm curious, with the electric company purchasing more and more property that is like typically farmland or could be used as farmland. We now have these solar farms. Does solar energy create as much power as it would as much as soybeans or corn would? Because we grow corn and make ethanol, and soybeans make other power sources as well. So I was just curious if solar makes as much power as soybean or corn.
Well, that's a good question, Alyssa. And yes, you can generate as much electricity with soybeans as you would with solar. The technology is different, and I'm really not an expert on soybeans, so I can't necessarily tell you how much bushels or gallons of soybean you would need in order to generate the same amount of fuel.
Wesley, you can have 2 more questions.
Okay. I think someone needs to go on mute. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. Thank you, Andy. All right, next up, Kushi, you have a question?
Yeah, so wonderful presentation, very insightful. I had a question from the standpoint of affordability. I'm not exactly sure how much it ties into your research area and interest, but how can the entire concept of solar panels be expanded in terms of outreach? Because I know affordability plays a huge role. Right now, myself and my family, we're looking into insert solar panels in our house on top of the roof, and the contracts that we've been looking at, they're pretty expensive. So how can the factor of affordability be given more attention to within like the realm of solar power?
Okay, so let me try to repeat your question and understand. You're asking how can we make solar panels more affordable for homeowners in order to have them installed, or to purchase the solar panels?
Both, to have them installed, and not only for homeowners, but just throughout, like even certain industries.
So that's a very good question, and I have actually 2 answers for that. There's 2 ways that you can make solar panels more affordable. One is the demand on solar panels. Now, for most of us, we are used to making electricity from a fossil plant burning, whether it's natural gas or coal. As we get to a society where we are looking to be more sustainable, then it actually will lower the cost of solar panels. And secondly, there's several government aids that will allow you to purchase solar panels at a discounted rate. And third, for us, there's actually several companies that reach out to us directly and ask us about purchasing solar panels, but unfortunately, we do not sell solar panels. We buy them in order to build the sites. So my presentation mainly covers utility grade solar. It's not really focused on rooftop solar, which is, you know, what most homeowners face right now. And that's I get a lot of questions on homeowners requesting to have solar panels installed on their roof, which is currently not part of our portfolio right now. It is something we are considering and may be doing in the next 2 to 3 years, but right at this point, it's not part of our portfolio. All right, next up I have Andy.
Thank you very much, Wesley. Very insightful and illuminating speech. I have one question that you may or may not know the answer to. The current solar panels for residential use, they are fixed. They don't track the sun for the most part, is my understanding. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's a fixed location. One of the things that I loved your presentation. One of the things that is a big unknown, I know that last year they changed the rules and extended the discounts for solar for Florida to 2022 for the 26% reduction. But there's talk in the new reconciliation bill for climate change that they're going to up the amount of credits for solar and EV use. The problem in Florida is that unlike, for example, Minnesota has a 50% rebate to help the homeowner get the panels. In the state of Florida, the only thing we really have access to is the 26% tax credit. Have you heard of anything going on in the state of Florida where they're going to make it easier to acquire? Any other incentives coming down the line?
Andy, I have not heard of any incentives coming down the line. As I mentioned before, my presentation is mainly on utility grade solar and not residential solar. But definitely, if I hear something in regards to residential solar, I can share that as well. But at this point, I don't.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. Well, if you have any further questions, you could definitely reach out to me on my presentation, or if there's something about solar that you're curious about, please just reach out to me afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Wesley, this was an excellent speech. Coming from a background where I have absolutely no knowledge about solar panels and the entire solar energy industry, it was quite informative and quite insightful considering how significant solar energy is right now, as well as in the forthcoming, where we see a potentially more sustainable way and approach to life in the future. You did an inexplicable job at describing and setting a visualization of the functioning of the intricacies of solar panels. And for someone who doesn't have any prior knowledge regarding solar panels and their functioning, you explained it amazingly as to how solar energy is generated, to the point how that energy is transferred and attained to consumers and customers. Again, those technicalities of the generation of power from solar energy all the way to exporting electricity to customers was a very, very informative phase. You brought to life your words through adding all those visuals. And it just allowed us to both visualize it and think about it, because you added elements of, the graphics as well as the visuals made it so much easier to understand the entire process. It was both a thought process as well as a visual process. So kudos on combining and intertwining those two senses. I would recommend you add an element of engagement. I know this is a PowerPoint presentation, so it might be difficult at times to bring the focus to yourself as the speaker and add more either modulations to your voice itself, because there's one thing I noticed, and I'm not sure if everyone noticed this, but I can be a little scrupulous when I hear things, especially in PowerPoint. But as you were going from one slide to the next, there was a gap in between, and then your voice almost just came out of nowhere when you started the next slide. So I would recommend you to fill that gap, either have more swift transitions within your PowerPoint rather than having a gap and then in that time, the audience isn't like getting to hear much, and that time can be very pertinent because it's a make or break moment within that time. So the audience can either lose their focus or interest from the entire presentation, or they can keep it sustained with diminishing interest. But overall, very informative considering the subject, because this is a subject that not many people are aware of, but yet you kept it interesting and appealing till the very end, and your question and answer session was incredible. So great work overall.